Now let's talk about the relationship between unemployment and inflation and something called the Phillips curve. When we look at the Phillips curve, we're going to look at what's called the expectations Phillips curve. The Phillips curve is the curve that shows the relationship between unemployment and inflation. And here we're going to take into account expectations of inflation. So we want to look at how people might form expectations about inflation. Well, here's some things that we know. We know in a boom that output is above potential output. When output is above potential output, we know that the unemployment rate is below the natural rate of unemployment, and thus this is going to drive prices up, and inflation will be higher than expected. So we have some level of expected inflation built into the economy, and it can be at any level. Say it's at 2%. If output goes above potential output, inflation is going to be higher than 2% because prices are going to rise because unemployment is too low. If we're in a recession where output is below potential output, then the unemployment rate is above the natural rate and inflation will be lower than expected. And we're going to look at a Phillips curve, and we're going to see how these relationships between unemployment and inflation look here in a second. But first, let's talk about how well the public forms its expectations. And there's a theory in macroeconomics called rational expectations. This is the economic theory that analyzes how the public forms expectations and assumes that they do so, and on average, those forecasts are correct. So with rational expectations, the public understands the relationships we just talked about, the relationship between output and potential output, unemployment and the natural rate of unemployment, and what that means for inflation in the future. So let's look at some data and see what has happened over time. Here's some dynamics of inflation and unemployment from 1986 to 1993. We can see beginning in 1986 there was a drop in the unemployment rate as inflation rose. And then once we get to 1989, we can see that inflation starts to fall again and the unemployment rate drops. Now, why might that have happened? Well, as the unemployment rate falls, it's getting lower relative to the natural rate of unemployment and putting pressure on prices to rise. As the unemployment rate rises, we can say relative to the natural rate of unemployment, it's going up. That puts pressure on prices to fall, and we see that happening as well when we look at the Phillips curve. Finally, when we talk about dynamics and the relationship of unemployment to the natural rate of unemployment, we need to understand that over periods of time, long periods of time, the natural rate of unemployment might change. Now, why might it change? Well, remember what makes up the natural rate of unemployment. It's the combination of frictional unemployment and structural unemployment. So when demographics change or institutional changes occur, or recent histories of the economy, changes in growth of labor productivity, any of these things are going to affect frictional or structural unemployment and thus change the natural rate of unemployment. This is going to change the dynamics in our economy as this happens, and policymakers need to be cognizant of these changes.